known Mary McKSchmidt for about 10 years. We first met at a Healing Our Waters conference when she and her wonderful husband Reuben were there peddling artwork before she evolved into the writing work formally, and she's a great artist as well. So I am going to turn it over to Mary at this point, and Jim never gets over. I'm not going to be questioning Mary. This isn't an interrogatory or a cross-examination.
That's what I was told.
It's an interview. So I'm not going to put her on the spot. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Mary with my first interview question, and that is, why did you write this book?
Okay, so I am using a mic because I am. And he's not going to have this as easy as he thinks, because right out of the gate, I am going to answer his question, but first, I have to say, thank you all for coming today. And thank you to Kathy Hurley for making this happen, to our sponsors. Thank you. Thank you to Dave, who is has been a wealth of knowledge for me on this journey, and I'll tell you a little bit about this journey, and has mentored me. And as I think we all know, we need mentors, and so he's mentored me and has been a friend. And then lastly, just a quick thank you to Reuben, who is my husband and Boataholic, the Boataholic I married, who has allowed me to share our stories so that I might plant seeds of awareness to help create the political will necessary to clean up and protect these lakes. So why did I write this book? Well, that gives you a little hint right there. I am in love with this lake that's a couple of blocks away from us. I first fell in love with it as a child when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and my dad took his 3 eldest children camping at Orchard Beach State Park in Manistee, Michigan. And I'll never forget, we opened the door of our station wagon. We had station wagons then. That tells you how old I am. And ran up to the top of this bluff, and I saw for the first time the most magnificent body of water that just seemed to go forever. And we spent the week swimming like fish, diving through the waves, building sand castles. And I remember going home and that winter when my mom said, she always had with 6 kids, she always had us put our list of what we wanted from Santa on the refrigerator. So on my list, I put, I want a cabin in the woods near Lake Michigan. So I will tell you that it did finally happen. It took many decades, but it did finally happen. And so I have been in a relationship with this lake from, when I was 6 years old. And I'm an avid sailor, thanks to Mary and Reuben. I've sailed this lake. I have run along this lake. I have biked along this lake. I have walked the beaches of this lake. I have hiked this lake. I go to this lake for nourishment. I go to this lake when I am troubled and I don't know what to do. I go to this lake to connect with a much higher power. So I care deeply about this lake. And when I learned that the health of Lake Michigan is at risk, that it is potentially at a tipping point, and if things aren't done immediately, the damage could be beyond repair. And so I said to myself, what can I do? What can I do? And one of those paths was to dust off a gift that I was given at birth, that I put on hold for my career life of 30 years, and that is writing. And so I began writing about what I'm learning and all of the adventures and the stories with the hopes of raising awareness and getting people engaged
very good. It's obvious that she doesn't need a whole lot of questions. Get going, so I can just do window dressing here. But let me see what I don't want to steal all of the good stuff in the book, but Mary, you had an experience relatively early in your life when wanderlust hit you, and you ventured into the African continent and had an interesting experience there that interestingly enough involved water as well. Tell us a little bit about that and how that influenced your life.
Yeah, so water, I've had this connection with water on multiple levels forever. And I am a wanderer, I'm an adventurer, yes, I am justly accused. So midway through my college life, I had an opportunity to go over to South Africa with a couple of friends. I was midway through a college degree that I was financing, so I had no money. But one of the friends' parents had set up a possible job for me, and so I thought, wow, when else am I gonna have a chance to go to another country, have potentially a job waiting for me? What a great opportunity. And so I did. The job didn't pan out. I smuggled my way into the country, and you'll read about that, because I didn't have enough money. I ended up meeting people from Australia and New Zealand that were gonna go camping all through what was then Rhodesia, Botswana, South Africa. And of course our money, the little bit of money we had, ran out. And so my job was to get us water to survive. And so I found myself in the difficult position of standing on the side of a road, looking at a plush motel, and knowing I was going to have to violate my values, everything I was raised to believe in. I was going to have to go steal water if we were to survive. And no person should have to choose between survival and stealing. And it did shape my life. And it didn't shape my life to say, boy, I really value water. No, that would come later. It shaped my life because I said, I am never going to be poor again. And so I came back, changed my degree from English to business, and launched what ended up being out of an MBA, launched what ended up being a 30-year career, eventually becoming a president for Baxter Healthcare. So it did absolutely shape my life.
Well, it's interesting, the little turn you took. I went from math to English myself. Here I am today. But, and it's interesting you mentioned being without water. I think people are aware that roughly 1 billion people on the planet don't have adequate drinking water, and over 2 billion now don't have adequate water for sanitation purposes. So this is a real issue, and we are sitting on an incredible treasure that we have here. So you had an experience like that early in your life. So how did that affect the next part of your life? What happened after that?
So I was 30 years in corporate America, climbing the ladder, and I reached a point where I just felt I was supposed to be doing something different with my life. I wasn't sure what. So we were out sailing. We've sailed, I think I've shared with several of you, we've sailed 3 of the 5 Great Lakes. We were sailing on Lake Michigan. And we were sailing north to Grand Haven after heavy spring rains. And I happened to see, I didn't happen to see, you would just see it, the brown, murky, debris-filled, I would later learn, sewage-filled water of the Grand Rapids, of the Grand River, flowing into this lake that I love. And I was horrified. I thought that the lakes, because from afar they looked so clean and pristine, and of course we had the Clean Water Act of 1972, and I thought, the lakes are in pristine shape. And I found out, no, that is not the case. And I decided to learn about everything that I could about what was going on with these Great Lakes, with Lake Michigan. And was fortunate because that was in 2005, at a time when an organization called the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration was coming out with basically a strategic plan for what needed to be done to clean up these lakes. And so I started learning about everything I could, and I started talking about it as my neighbors and certainly my husband and friends knew. I started talking about everything I was learning. And I had this woman who was a coach, who was helping me with this transition from Baxter to life after Baxter. And she said, do you know, Mary, that every time you talk about the Great Lakes, your face just lights up? And I said, well, no. She said, why don't you write about what you're learning? I could think of a zillion reasons why I shouldn't write about what I was learning. Let's see, I wasn't a trained journalist, I wasn't a scientist. And she said to me, Mary, this time in your life is a journey of faith. And faith is a bird that feels dawn breaking and sings while it is still dark. I'm going to say that again. Faith is a bird that feels dawn breaking and sings while it is still dark. So I went out and I bought a dictionary and a thesaurus and started writing columns and blogs and eventually this book. And I started speaking about what I was learning and photographing everything along all my many adventures, so that through my writing and my photography and public speaking, I could raise awareness.
So deep down inside, you really were an English major.
I was. Well, so my mom is a writer, and so my mom, I was a writer and I was a painter, and I took, she would take me to art classes way over on the other side of town. She taught me to write. She introduced me to typing, gave me a book so I could learn how to type. Gave me her old Smith Corona, doing like the little black one. Again, I'm dating myself. So I could learn to type. So yeah, I was very much in English. And in fact, for the first couple of years, I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but for the first couple of years of my college, I paid for it by being one of the first sports editors in this country for a newspaper in the Lansing area.
I just had a little flashback on typing, isn't it? ASDF. Between 9th and 10th grade, I guess it was. Now, I understand you had an opportunity to grill the former mayor of Grand Rapids about what he was sending out to the lake, and I do know that you never would have seen that coming out of Racine, Wisconsin, where John Dickert was the former mayor there. That never happened over there. He made sure that never happened. So, Mary, you had somewhat of an epiphany, and the bird that was singing when it was still dark, but dawn was coming. I guess that there might be some people in this room who are at a certain point in their careers where they think, well, maybe I really need to do something else. Do you have any advice for them about how they might deal with that?
I think the greatest gift a person can give themselves is to learn that which makes you unique. What is the gift that you have? And I may be a little slow on the uptake to have figured it out. It only took me about, 50 some odd years. But I thought everybody could write. And it's kind of like my husband thought, well, everybody can build things, everybody can hang pictures, everybody can repair things. I think those things that you think, oh, everybody can do this, pay attention to that. No, that can be a special gift. I think the challenge becomes, can you find a way to use that gift and marry it with your passion to make your community, your state, your country, this planet, a safer, healthier, more just place for us all to live. And I think that it's very hard to, well, for artists like writers, to necessarily make a living writing. And so, but I think if you can find ways to marry your passion and your gift with a way to make a living, that's the ideal. And I'll give you an example. So I was getting interviewed by Channel 6 in Traverse City, and the guy behind the camera, who was filming me, come to find out, he was one of the 5 guys that started an organization that paddleboarded across Lake Michigan to raise awareness and raise money for the lake. They since have paddleboarded. I mean, I have enough harrowing stories here in a boat, paddleboarding. They paddleboarded across that lake, and then now they've done Lake Superior and Lake Huron. And, they do it on this side. And I look at the kiteboarders that love kiteboarding and got sick and tired of U.S. Steel and some of the things that were getting dumped into the water, and so got active in trying to get that prevented. And so I think so that would be my advice. Pay attention to those things that you think everybody can do, because chances are they can.
Well, I know that you probably love and care about every page of your book, but is there a passage that you would be willing to share with us that is particularly near and dear to your heart?
There is. I am going to share with you a passage, because at the end of that passage, I have a request for all of you. So, this is age, it drives me crazy. Glasses. Okay, so what I'm reading to you is the very first piece that I wrote, an essay that was picked up by the Healing Our Waters conference, by a person that was doing the opening remarks. I posted this essay on the internet. It was picked up and read at the 2006 opening of the Healing Our Waters in Cleveland, Ohio. And it is titled, "Can One Person Make a Difference?" This morning, like most mornings, I ran inland for roughly an hour. It's part of my daily ritual, providing me time to reflect, to meditate, and of course to sweat. My cool down walk along the shores of Lake Michigan is my treat to myself. My heart sings when I see this magnificent body of fresh water, touch its soft white sand beaches that stretch for miles, and look up at the towering dunes studded by strong, tall maples, oaks, and pine trees. This is sacred space. Yet scientists say it is endangered, the ecosystem of the Great Lakes threatened with irreversible damage if something is not done immediately. I shake my head in disbelief. How could this happen? More importantly, how do we reverse the slide? The challenges facing the Great Lakes are daunting, so overwhelming. It is easy to feel powerless as an individual. I have lived my adult life in corporate America, most recently in a position reporting to the chairman and CEO of one of the largest healthcare manufacturers in the world. I know nothing about getting involved as an individual without the backing of a $10 billion corporation and the support of millions of people. Even so, I know I can't remain silent. While I have traveled to places of spectacular beauty, none touch me like the Great Lakes. In my heart, these waters are home. So I talk about the Great Lakes and all I'm learning. And in the process, I've discovered I'm not alone in my passion for protecting these great waters. Almost always, the first question someone asks me is, what can I do? Now, I share that with you because on this journey, I've had the opportunity to meet so many inspiring people, amazing people. And one of the most inspiring was actually a group of 42 fourth graders in Quincy Elementary School in Zeeland, Michigan. I was asked by the teachers if I would come and talk to fourth graders. Well, I will talk to anybody. But I thought, I haven't been in a fourth grade class since I was a fourth grader. What am I going to talk to these kids about? We don't have kids. And so I did what I always do when I don't know what to do. I went to the lake and I walked the beach and I said, what on earth? And when I walk the beach, I always carry a bag and pick up trash. And so I'm walking the beach and I'm like, what am I going to talk to these kids about? And then I look at the trash I'm picking up and I said, I know exactly what I'm going to talk to these kids about. So with the permission of the teachers, I brought my bag of beach trash into the classroom and dumped it on the floor. And there, amongst lots of stuff, the overwhelming number one thing are balloon ribbons flowing out of this pile of trash like a volcano, like lava coming out of a volcano. And these kids are like, oh, how did that happen? Where did those come from? I said, I don't know. What do you think? They said, people let balloons fly up into the air. I said, you're right. So we decided to create a multimedia campaign that would raise awareness about not releasing balloons into the air. And every campaign needs a slogan. They came up with this slogan. It's fabulous. It is, don't let it cry, or don't let it fly, or the Great Lakes will cry. Don't let it fly, or the Great Lakes will cry. And they canvassed all of Zeeland, and guess what they found out? The two high schools had just ordered 450 white balloons to release at graduation ceremonies. It was tradition. So these little kids, they got the high school principals to come to their classroom. They had raised money by selling little buttons with their slogan to go to the Saugatuck State Park themselves and pick up trash. So they had their own mound of balloon ribbons, and they had found actually a picture of a fish with a ribbon all the way through it, so it was very compelling. That was posted up on their board, and they convinced these principals to cancel the order for balloons. And those kids, 8 years later, graduated in balloon-free ceremonies. Now, I raised this up to you because one of the little boys said, during this, he said, well, we can take care of Zeeland, but you know, the winds across Lake Michigan come out of the southwest. We got to get to Chicago. We got to get Chicago to quit releasing balloons. And so, here is my request to the Union League Club of Chicago, which has done such amazing things over time.
We don't release balloons.
But here is the thing, is that 5 states have passed legislation banning the mass release of balloons. None of those states are Great Lakes states. Cities across this country have banned mass release of balloons. None of them are Great Lakes cities. So my request of you is that you think about, consider taking on this mission that these fourth graders did and ban the release of balloons here in Chicago. It will, I promise you, it will make a huge difference on the other side of the lake.
So there really is a story behind the story, and now we know that deep down inside, you're basically an agitator and a revolutionary. In corporate disguise.
Exactly. So nothing's changed. One of five, right?
That's why I love her.
Troublemaker. Well, and I also saw the CEO and president of the Cities Initiative take notice of the lack of Great Lakes, St. Lawrence cities that don't ban the.
And I would be more than happy to come and talk. And because we made a promise, those 42 kids and I, and the 2 teachers, we said, for the rest of our lives, we are going to do our part to eliminate balloon litter. And so this is an aside, this isn't, believe me, this isn't in the book.
It's okay.
2 years later, I got an email from a couple of the little kids saying, Mrs. Schmidt, I didn't go by McSchmidt then, did you see the Oprah Winfrey released thousands of balloons with the launch of her TV network? No, I didn't see that. And I got an email, so this story about the fourth graders I talked a lot about, and so some of my readers, I posted a blog, sign up for it, you can find it at marymcschmidt.com. A reader contacted me last fall and said, Mary, do you know that they're having a marathon in Chicago for breast cancer and that they're planning on releasing 15,000 pink balloons? I said, no. And so, you know, I will work with anybody and everybody because that was my commitment to these little kids that had so much enthusiasm, so much passion, and nobody was going to tell them that they were not going to be successful. So I put that out there as a request, and maybe you can help with that campaign. It's I think, easier than some of the other challenges. And I was talking with someone about, you know, antiquated sewage systems and the cost of moving from septic fields to, you know, to city sewer and trying to eliminate the runoff from agricultural. I mean, some of these are hard. Not releasing balloons. There are other ways to celebrate, other ways to honor people that have died than trashing the planet.
Well, I have had the privilege of asking all of the questions so far, so I'd like to open it up at this point.
Now use a mic if somebody wants a mic.
For anyone who might have a question of Mary. And if you don't, I've got 24. Go ahead, fire away.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Mary Kay. I just moved here from Cleveland, Ohio. I grew up on Lake Erie. And in Cleveland, Ohio, I was one of I think a small portion of children who had the privilege of growing up on the lake because of infrastructure along the lake there. And so I have witnessed how important it is for community access to recreation on the lake and how that affects the amount of investment we have in water quality. You speak to how some of these topics of water quality are very difficult. You mentioned a few topics there at the end, such as nutrients going into the lake and other pollutants and sewage. I'm wondering, since I just moved here, if you could possibly tell me about successful strategies that institutions or the city of Chicago might take, or successful strategies that you've seen that can be used to encourage stakeholder engagement for citizens who live on the lake or perhaps who live a bit further from the lake, since it's a valuable resource for everyone.
So, great question, Mary. Thank you. And Yes, I would say a couple of things. Number one, we live in a democracy. And that means every government official at the community, state, and federal level work for us. If we don't make water a priority, it isn't gonna happen. So the number one thing that I say is pick up the phone. You don't have to be intimidated. You don't have to know all these issues. All you have to do, and they don't actually, or send an email, and they don't really pay that much attention. It just becomes a hash mark. Pick up the phone and just say, or email and say, what have you done for the Great Lakes lately? What have you done for Lake Michigan lately? What have you done to make sure that my water and my family's water is clean and safe for drinking? Just once a month, once a quarter. I interviewed a congressman in Michigan, and when I was writing a column for a newspaper, he said, "Oh, Mary, you're the only one that ever contacts me about Lake Michigan." And I thought, well, I can change that. I can change that. So I would start with that. And then the second thing is because, we are individuals, and I know a lot, I know a little about a lot. The great thing is there are organizations in the Great Lakes, including the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, which is where I met David, that are trying to build sustainable communities in the Great Lakes. Sustainable means that we have economic prosperity, but we don't do it at the expense of our resources. I was fortunate to work for Baxter, which was one of the first companies to adopt the sustainability index that said every leader and eventually every employee in the company was measured and compensated on three things. Profitability, of course, our stewardship in the communities that we served, and our focus on the environment, doing more with less. We don't have to choose between jobs and our water. We don't have to choose between development and good stewardship of the land. We can't choose. Leadership requires learning the word and, the environment and economic prosperity. So does that answer? Kind of long-winded. Thanks, Mary.
Another question?
How much of a threat do you see the Asian carp being to Lake Michigan?
Oh, well, this is, so you know what? This is the Achilles heel of Lake Michigan. And of course, my passion is Lake Michigan, but all these lakes are connected. And so, the number one, when I talk to scientists, when I talk to scientists and environmental leaders that know a lot more than me, the number one threat to our Great Lakes, period, are invasive species. The Asian carp being one of them. The Asian carp, actually, it's not just the Asian carp. This canal, the Chicago Sanitary Ship Canal, is a highway, a two-way highway for 29 species that are invasive to the Mississippi Basin going that way, and the Asian carp and 9 other invasives coming this way. The Asian carp gets everybody's attention because, well, for one thing, these fish eat everything and they will decimate the fishing industry for the Great Lakes. Then if you're a boater or a kayaker or a rower, the silver fish jump out and literally break noses, cause concussions, etc. It is a huge threat. And my hope had been, and I think many's hope had been, to get it back to the way nature had it. Not have, for those of you that don't know, initially nature has a way of protecting its ecosystems, and the Mississippi River did not connect with Lake Michigan until in 1900 1800, until that canal was built and the flow of the river reversed. I see it as huge, huge, and my fear is that because we only funded on a 1 year at a time basis, and because, depending on the administration, the Great Lakes funding is important or it's not important, which is why I say pick up the phone and call, we may not get the funding we need long-term to put in place what the Army Corps is saying is the second best thing to just shutting off and eliminating the connection. Is that a fair,
It's a fair statement, and if not eliminating it completely, making a much firmer barrier than exists right now. John?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for being here and thank you for sharing, because oftentimes people have incredible experiences, but they don't share them for us to learn from. So first of all, thank you. Second of all, the gentleman to your left should probably have a little statue down here on Millennial Park, because if you talk about a person who has changed, individually changed what's going on this planet, it's Dave Ulrich of the Great Lakes.
absolutely.
So-
Inspiration.
Absolutely. You had another testimony here today where somebody else who has been sailing the Great Lakes has been finding balloons all over. So
You
we
gotta
have,
know, we just were talking about balloons, just in a 4-day weekend, just up the western coast. We kept finding these piles of Mylar balloons sitting there, and we took out 50 just one day
Right.
with the
It's-
fish. And then finally, we're like, we're never gonna get home if we keep getting these, right? So we had to stop.
Thank you.
But it was crazy. I had no idea, though, to your point, until you see it.
And guess what happened at Super Bowl? Did anyone see that? All those Chinese land or whatever they're called,
Yeah.
floating up. I mean, what
I
are we
thought
doing?
of Mary,
Trashing
actually,
the
when I saw
planet?
that.
We're trashing the planet.
so in the travels, and the time that you've been writing this book and thinking about this and doing your research, is there an issue that surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me the most is how much people in this region take water for granted. So I shared with you the Africa story. I didn't share with you, we lived in Tennessee for I think 12 years, and our community had to buy its water from Nashville. And there are just two of us, and they had water rationing for outdoor watering. Our water bills in the summer, just two of us, could exceed $300. And so let me tell you something. You don't water the lawn when it is raining, and you don't leave the water on when you're brushing your teeth, or when you're rinsing the dishes and you need to go over and get some more dishes. You don't do that because it's money. And I hate to say this, but money matters. And until we start paying attention that this is the scarcest resource on the planet and start incentivizing people to protect it, we're gonna lose it. That was my greatest surprise. I'll never forget jogging along South Shore in Lake Macatawa and saying, oh my gosh, it's pouring down rain. Well, first you might ask, why was I out there when it was pouring down rain? That's a whole other subject. And everybody's sprinklers were on. I thought, what on earth are we doing? And are you from Racine? So my first real sailing is off your beach with catamarans for years. We raced catamarans off Racine Beach, and it is a great beach and a great city. So thank you for keeping it that way.
Well, it's interesting, Mary mentioned taking it for granted. I'll never forget my first meeting with Mayor Daley when he was starting the city's initiative, and I don't know how many of you got a chance to know him or even observe him. And he said, you know, Dave, what's the problem? The problem is everybody takes that water for granted out there. That's the problem. So there you go. Are we out of